Okay, it's on you whenever you're ready to roll.
What's up, everybody? We've been talking for a few years now about erasing race. But today we're going to take a step back with a panel of experts on the matter, and we're going to educate on what race is and why we need to erase it. We've got an all-star lineup for you today, and we thank you for being here and welcome to the National Week of Conversation as the Wayne Carlen Show presents Talking Race. Let's go. All right. Like I said earlier, today this is our blockbuster show because we're normally talking about race and racial issues. We never usually have anybody on here that knows more than we do about race. But today we got a special group of people who are well versed in this whole concept. And today we're going to go a little bit longer than normal. Normally you have a 30-minute show. We're going to go for an hour today because this is going to be special for all of you. So without further ado, you've heard from me. I'm Wayne.
And I'm Carlin, and boy, we excited about what we got on our show for you today. I mean, this is probably the most excited I've been about one of these shows because it's really going to be dynamic. We just got a great cast of people who are involved in this same industry that I'm in, and we call it the elimination of the concept of race. And so you'll hear about that as we go through the show today. And so I'm really excited, and we're going to really get into it because, like Wayne was saying, normally these shows are 30 minutes. We call it the fastest 30 minutes on the internet, but today we've got an hour, and we really do want to take our time and really try to express some things to you about this ideology of race that you may not have heard before. So we're going to get started with that. And I'm going to, first of all, I'm going to be the guy because I know all these people very well. And I'm going to start out and I'm going to give each one of them a chance to introduce themselves because I, number one, don't have the background to talk about how great they are. But I can tell you, these are some great people that you would want to know in life. And that's the thing. These people are not just great because they have this idea of race that I agree with. These are just great people to know. So I'm going to start out and introduce the first person. I want to, let me go ahead and bring her into the room so that we can, so I want her to hear these things. So that's what because at first I was like, well, maybe I should just go ahead and do it first. But I'm going to go ahead and bring her into the room. And then I'm going to identify who she is. I happened to meet this fabulous lady, as I call her, when I was watching Lamont Hill on Black News Tonight. And I heard her talking and I was just like blown away. And I was like, how could I not know her already? So it was that amazing when I heard her talk and the ideas that she had. And I thought I was the only crazy one like that. And I said, and when Wayne saw it, Wayne said, you have a twin, I was like, really cool. So that's outstanding to know. But I want to introduce you and let her talk for a couple of minutes and introduce herself. This is my friend. She's awesome and she's smart, bright, and she's going to change the world. This is Dr. Sheena Mason.
Thank you so much, Carlin, and thank you, Wayne. I'm excited to be here with you. So my name is Sheena Mason. I'm an assistant professor in English at SUNY Oneonta and also the creator of something called the Theory of Racelessness, which has also turned into and developed into the business and educational firm called Theory of Racelessness. Outside of that, I'm a mom of 2-year-old triplets and a wife.
So she's busy.
I'm very busy.
Wow.
And I'm highly motivated by the fact that I'm a wife and a mom because I want so much more for our society. I want so much more for my children. I'm just kind of over the landscape of racism, if you will, as many people are. So I'm happy to dig into some ideas I have about how we can really start to affect change that I know is possible if we keep an open mind.
Outstanding. Thank you, Sheena. All right, the next person we're going to bring in is a guy I met. Of course, I met this guy via Facebook. You know how you go out on Facebook and you start having posts and you connect with somebody and you go, wow, I think this guy thinks like me. And I realized, and I started watching all of his posts. And of course, we talked earlier about this one post that he just did this past week where he was singing with his son. And it was simply amazing. I said, so besides all the great things I know about him, then he adds that to his repertoire of being a crooner. He can sing like crazy. So I want to welcome you all and let him give him a couple of minutes to introduce himself. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Adrian Lyles. Glad to have you here, Adrian. You got it.
It's good to be here. Thank you, Carlen. I don't know where I developed this this singing that you speak of, but
you posted it. No, you can't do it and post it. People know then when you post it.
For sure, man. But no, so I live in North Georgia where my wife and 2 children reside. This is home to me. I've spent the past several years studying and practicing finance. Finance is what's led me to understand a lot of the issues surrounding the concept of race in the Western world. A lot of things that I've studied where most people would see a disparity on the hinges of skin color, I've noticed that a lot of times that the data would show something different if you extrapolated and looked at it from an economic perspective. And so my background in finance and economics intertwined to lead me to a deeper study several years ago into the concept of race, and particularly race in America. It was a moment when I was holding a picture of my mother-in-law with her long brown hair and her doting blue eyes as she was holding our son, my wife and I's oldest son. And I began to ask the question, what does it mean to be Black or white? This is something that's also paralleled in a book by Thomas Chatterton Williams, Unlearning Race, where he describes a similar epiphany, where you see these lines that seem so concrete that become blurred when you're experiencing something that probes you to question your paradigm. And that's sort of my foray into the understanding that race itself was rather pernicious and deleterious and needed to be dismantled in the Western world.
Carlen, you're muted. Unmute.
Oh, yeah. See, I was trying to be a gentleman. Yeah, but I was saying I had the epiphany, that same thing when I was when you were talking. I was going, I wonder if he's read Thomas Chatterton Williams, because that was the same thing that I was thinking about when you were talking about that. Because I did read his book and how he had that epiphany when his child was born. That wow, this is not the child that this world has made this child out to be. You know, and putting it in this skin color box. And so pretty good, outstanding. All right, well, let me get to our last guy here. The last guy I'll bring into the room is Ken Hunter. And Ken Hunter, I call him I call him a composite of these two, because he's so deep intellectually and he's so grounded philosophically, like both of these people that you just heard from are. And he's Ken Hunter. I've known him for over 30 years, and he just says stuff that's so deep that he didn't realize he just drives me to just like start studying, because he says stuff and I go, all right. And then when I start studying, and you know, especially the stuff that we're on now, I go to Adrian or Dr. Mason. And so you know, so it all kind of works out. So we got a great group of people here. But Ken, you got 2 minutes. Go ahead and tell them who you are.
Ken Hunter. First of all, I'm thankful to be what I say are professionals who do this for a living. I don't necessarily agree with all those words, adjectives you used to describe me, but I like to think professional, because that means I just think and I don't get paid for anything. I'm not producing anything. But so I'm thankful to be here to be involved in the conversation. And one of the questions that I think you wanted us to ask, how do we get into this line of work? Is that part of the introduction,
Well, yeah, you can go ahead and you can go ahead and go there.
Carlen?
Go ahead and tell us.
Oh no, not if you're not there yet. I'll stick with
We
the
can do,
program.
hey, this is free
Uh,
flowing. We're going to have
basically, that's
discussion.
it.
We're all here in the room. We're just going to talk about this stuff. So you can talk about that because we'll have other places to go. So go ahead and tell us. Yeah. How'd you get here?
Oh, okay. Okay, so how I got into this, what you put as line of work, for me, like most people, I was born into it because, again, it's not a line of work for me. It's a natural calling, I feel, to know one's identity and purpose. So that's the line of work that I feel it is, and I feel we're all on a similar journey of where and what we've been called, what we call ourselves, and individually and collectively. That I'm here to listen and learn the questions that I need to in my walk in this line of work or life's experience to further myself individually on that journey and us collectively. So yeah.
Outstanding. Great. And before you get to your question there, Wayne, we've got a good number of people who are just really eager for this conversation. So let's go ahead and get started on this because I've got a room full of people just listening and they're really ready for this.
Mm-hmm.
Are we going to have the other two panelists tell us how they got started in it as well?
Now let's go ahead and they'll get to it. I mean, we'll get to it. Yeah.
Well, that's cool. That's cool. Because I do have a starter question. Okay. So can somebody just kind of give me a solid definition of what we call race? We know that term is thrown around a lot and we hear all kind of different things. What does that mean to you guys?
We're going to give our academia rep, Dr. Mason, first shot. Dr. Mason, you got to cover that, race, the definition.
I'm going to give such an unsatisfactory answer. It's either going to be unsatisfactory or it's going to be profound. We'll see which way it goes. So most people define race as speaking to our ability to define human beings into separate categories based largely on phenotype, ancestry, and DNA. People often have what are called biological beliefs in race or naturalist beliefs in race, or alternatively, they believe that if race is not biological, it's socially constructed in the ways that I just described based on phenotype, ancestry, and DNA. My problem with the definition is that as a racial skeptic, I contend that race is not biological, nor is it a social construction. If I can translate everything people identify or rate as race or racial into something else, including other social constructions such as ethnicity, culture, economic or social class, and racism itself, then to me, the thing that people call race, regardless of how one defines it, is non-existent. It just doesn't exist because we're misidentifying other things. And part of the problem of that misidentification becomes the fact that if you caught it, racism also camouflages itself and gets interpreted into race. And that's why we continue to find ourselves in this quagmire of sort of inability to seemingly transcend racism or stop it in its tracks because we're misidentifying, packaging everything, calling it race, and racism is hiding its face there.
Others.
It was profound. I know it was profound.
Yeah, it was.
It wasn't unsatisfactory.
Because but when I and to bring it back to the to get it out of that deep level, I say Dr. Mason has to go deep. That I would call it, and this is the way I try to characterize it more than anything, is a hierarchy based on skin color. It's, and so anytime people talk about, subscribing that there's nothing wrong with race, I go, well, are you okay with a hierarchy based on skin color? Something that says that's how you get a term minorities and majorities and inferior and superior, because it's a hierarchy and that's never okay. That's just not okay. So based on skin color, that's what I would call race.
Yeah, Carlen, I just want to point out that that's by definition racism, what you just described, right? So it's not race, it's
Yes.
sort of
Yes.
supporting what I'm pointing to, which is that
Yes.
oftentimes race and racism, there's a sameness there that people that remains obscured because we also package it with other meaningful socially constructed things such as culture, etc. So we have to decouple it to get rid of the hierarchy.
That was a question I was going to ask you later in the script there. I was going to ask you this question about that, but you explained it clearly there because, and this is the point she's making, and we'll try to come back and clear this up so that everybody understands. But inherent in the concept of race, because of that hierarchy, is racism. And so what people don't understand is that, no, we just want to get rid of racism. Well, you've got to get rid of this idea of race because you get them together. They come together. And that's why people misconstrue which one, what is what, as Dr. Mason was saying, because they're inextricably linked. They're together. And you've got to get rid of race to get rid of racism. So that's how we get to the eliminativist viewpoint, which we're going to get from you later, Dr. Mason. All right. So, all right. Anything else? Go ahead, Adrian. You got to say something. I mean, because I know I see your brain going.
Yeah. One of the things I want to point out is after talking with Dr. Sheena, something that I took away from our conversation privately was the fact that she does not consider race to be a social construct. The terminology was a little new to me. I don't even think she realized she impressed me with that and did not refer to race as a construct. And I think in some of her writing, she describes, that it is still in the building process, that you have constructionists, those who are still building on the idea. It's just a concept, not a construct, because race has no definable parameters. It's not like the states in the United States. These are constructs, right? The state of Tennessee, the state of Ohio, where those lines are imaginary lines, though there is a consensus as to where those lines are. Even though they're not really there, society has constructed these parameters around our state borders and have determined that this is the state of Texas, the state of Tennessee, the state of Georgia, so on. No such parameters exist in the concept of race. So the question you ask about what does the word race mean, one of the ways that I have defined it more deeply and yet more simply is the word race is synonymous with group. And a lot of times when I'm using the word race to help people understand the language that I'm using, I will interchange the word class or classification or group, because in fact, Webster defines, if you look at synonyms, if you go Google synonym for class, and what you'll find is the word race appears as one of the synonyms for the word class. And so I began to examine the etymology of these words that define different groups. And in America, what we have done, I say America, but the Western world primarily writ large, what we have done is we have grouped people together based on phenotypical characteristics. And this, as we all know in this group, it's a relatively new concept throughout human history. This is not how people grouped together throughout human history. And it is somewhat unnatural. And if we examine the ways that people have been grouped together throughout history, the other ways actually did have parameters. And Dr. Sheena alluded to some of those being culture, more namely. And we see this throughout the world today, that countries are named after the languages that people speak, and language being one of the most centered points of all human culture. People grouped together with other people who speak their common language. So France, Germany, Spain, these people speak French, German, and Spanish, and they group together based on a common language. And with that, people tend to share common beliefs, common traditions, common behaviors, food patterns, fashion, etc. So when we think about race in America and the Western world, race has been confined and reduced to phenotypical characteristics, or the way that people look. And it's conflated with so many other things, such as culture, ethnicity, and even overlaps with color. When we say race in America, we're talking about a color-based group. And one of the things that you said, Carlin, as far as the hierarchy that's intertwined with race, wherever there is a class system, there is a hierarchy structure. The two, they go hand in hand. You cannot have a class system without some hierarchy structure. And so while we try to eliminate the idea of race through this group, we must educate those who seek to eliminate racism that the foundation of this is race itself.
Ken, you got anything?
Yes, especially with what the brother just said. My answer to that question was I don't have a definition, but I looked up the word race, and I looked up the etymology for the word race. And so the one that I most agree with based on etymology was, and it's this quote, people descended from a common ancestry. And then it said a class of persons allied by common ancestry. And that part about class stuck out with me because it's not just a class of people allied by common ancestry. I think where it comes into kind of modern day groupings of race, it's classes of people that are allied by common beliefs, ideology, philosophies, and concepts. And you mentioned about not being a social construction, or just using those words construction. What came to my mind was one of the things I'm seeing is it's a construction of concepts, and concepts are not finely delineated, and they're flexible and fluid. So just that the definition, yeah, I didn't have a definition for it. I know that it's defined by a lot of people, and just in terms of race, I used to say I hate race and racism and all that, and I had to get over the emotional feelings I had towards the entire subject. So to me, it's a 4-letter word that I'm hoping to erase from my vocabulary. I've learned new words that contain race, racialization, racialized, and Dr. Mason has given me an academic framework to achieve what she calls racelessness, but I even call it the R wordlessness, and that's not what she calls it. I'm just practicing eracism, and that's erasing that word from my vocabulary because of the language and the confusing of our language that just that simple 4-letter word does. So when the theory is put into practice for me, we won't even be studying or talking about race and that whole the issues that arise that will be over. But yes, I definitely I can identify with those definitions, and it just makes me more so convicted to get rid of not only that, but not only race and what it means and doesn't mean, but it's just using the word itself, and that's a challenge.
Hey, that's a really good, everybody, really good stuff. What I want to do now, I want Dr. Mason to lay the groundwork here with the philosophies of race, because everybody's kind of been using, we've started out talking about social constructions and all these things. Let's make that clear where that comes from, and let's talk about that for a little bit so everybody understands what we're talking about when we talk about constructionist, skepticism, eliminativist, all those things. So Dr. Mason, give us the philosophies of race pitch.
Hopefully, just the word philosophy doesn't scare a bunch of people off. So in the discipline of philosophy, there's a specialization where people study philosophies of race. And each one of us, each person, especially in American society, we hold 2 philosophies of race without even having the language to say, this is my philosophy of race. There are 6 categories altogether. 3 speak to what a person thinks race is, and 3 speak to what a person thinks should be done with race. So the 3 categories that speaks to what a person thinks race is include naturalism, which is the belief that race is biological. It's in your DNA. It's something you're born with. Then there's something called constructionism. Racial constructionists argue that race isn't likely a biological feature of human society, but because society is organized the way that it is still a constructed phenomena that by definition of being a constructed phenomena is real. And then the last category that speaks to what a person thinks race is something called skepticism. If you are a racial skeptic, which, hello, hi, my name is Sheena, I'm a skeptic, you argue that race doesn't exist in nature, nor does it exist as a social construction. And that gets interesting because famous skeptics such as Anthony Appiah, a professor, I think he's at NYU, his sort of skepticism means that he's skeptical about all social constructions, because the realness of socially constructed things for him is called into question. But that's not how my skepticism actually works, because just like Adrian was saying earlier, in terms of the nation and in terms of states, I believe in the realness of other socially constructed categories such as nation and states and money and weddings and all of that. But my disbelief in race is primarily a result of the fact that everything I can identify as race or racial across time can be properly translated into something else more precise and more true language, if you will. And so that for me is what makes unreal. And yet I recognize that racism is real and matters and has material effects. So for me, the social construction is racism. And one of my podcast subscribers said it best on one of my recent videos. She said, belief in the fiction of race creates the reality of racism. And I would argue that belief in the fiction of race creates and maintains the reality of racism, which gets us to what people think should be done with race. So there's one category called conservationism. It is as it sounds. If you're a conservationist, you're probably a naturalist, because you can't really do anything with nature except keep it, right? Or you can be a reconstructionist. Usually reconstructionists are constructionists. And the idea is that we can reconstruct, refashion, transmute what race is in our society. And my position is in the last category, which is something called eliminativism. As a skeptical eliminativist, and most eliminativists are skeptics, though you can be a constructionist eliminativist, as I was before I got into skepticism. As an eliminativist, I contend that to undo racism, we have to undo our belief in race, which is very important what I'm doing with the language there, because I don't believe in race. So it's undoing the belief in race that we have to undo in order to undo racism. So eliminativists want to do away with, throw in the dustbins of history, this concept or belief in race. And they would want to do so for a variety of reasons. It could be as simple as what Ken was saying. There's no definition that any human society tends to agree on, right? So for that reason, we could just throw it in the trash. Like, what are we doing? What are we doing here? Like, no, we don't even agree what the definition is. So what purpose is it serving, right? Or it could be more along the lines of where I think each of us stands, which includes the fact that we recognize that racism is hiding its face there, right? So we want to do away with it to stop racism in its tracks. So those are the philosophies of race. And I encourage and invite everyone listening to consider which philosophies of race they adopt and where do they stand at this moment.
Adrian and Ken, do y'all have a view on where you stand on either on those philosophies? Do you know where you are?
Oh yeah, I'm 100% eliminativist. Yeah, I'm all the way eliminativist.
Adrian, would you say you're a skeptical eliminativist or a constructionist eliminativist?
Absolutely skeptical eliminativist. I think that the concept of race can't be defined. And I love the fact that you pointed that out, that even in this group with well-studied individuals, and I was hoping that would be the case to confirm my viewpoint on this, confirm my bias, that all of us have a differentiated definition of the term race, and we are all very studied on this topic. And if you can't define a term, the best thing to do with it is just throw it in the trash. Or an idea or belief system, it doesn't even have uniformity between very studied people on a topic, let alone those who are rather lay or laymen when it comes to this study.
Ken, what do you say? What are you?
I tend to avoid labels, but this is a philosophy.
Right.
So I think in terms of philosophy, I think that would be the skeptical eliminativist, because I acknowledge the reality of race, but I don't recognize it as truth. So, and that's what I was trying to do, like fit my thought processes into the categories that Dr. Mason mentioned. So I think that's what it falls into, because as I shared with her once, she was the first person that I had seen that shared it was just a thought for me, but she had it written down, in text to even write the word race-ism as I saw it as being a belief. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I don't think a lot of people delve in, just belief itself, the ability and the capability to believe, and how it impacts who we are, which I think really that's at the foundation of who we are: belief, thoughts, words, and actions. So yes, I still don't know where I fit. I would have to ask someone to tell me where I fit, because I think I share the same philosophy, though.
All right. And so, that's, that was one of the questions I had for Dr. Mason. I was going to ask the question, but I think I'm clear on it now, because I think like you do, Ken. I was like, well, because I look at when critical race theorists start talking about social construction, I know for a fact, and we know historically, yeah, they did create this thing. It was created. It was a construction. It was, so then how can we say it's not a construction? Because they actually constructed it. But then when you bring in the issue of whether or not it's a legitimate or real construction, whether or not it's valid construction, then that puts me squarely into the skeptical side, because I'm like, yeah, it's not, it's like unicorns. Yeah, people believe in them, but they don't really exist. Yeah. They don't exist. So so I'm definitely a skeptic. And of course, we're all eliminativists, which is cool, because when I started this, like I said, in 2017, 2018, I didn't know anybody else talking about getting rid of race. I mean, just getting rid of race. I mean, I never heard of it. And then to give it some academic background with eliminativists, I like that, because I actually created Erase Race, which stands for eradicate race and strengthen ethics, And so that's great. Okay, go ahead, Wayne, you got a question?
Yeah, that was some good stuff right there. But let's go a little bit deeper here. I want to ask each of you, in your perfect world of eliminating race, since you just mentioned that, Carlen, what happens or needs to happen first if we're going to get there? Everybody understand that question?
Yeah, we're all thinking. I hear the brains turning. How do we want to get? Because I told everybody to keep it on the level, so everybody's thinking, how do I get this point across? So,
I mean, I think step one is helping as many people as possible identify the problem, and part of the reason why we've maintained or sort of kept ourselves in the quagmire of racism is largely because eliminativists have historically been marginalized and excluded from the canon, which means they're excluded from classrooms, which means eliminativism, the philosophies of race aren't taught. We're taught to be in the default philosophies of race, such as naturalism and constructionism and reconstructionism, up to the point where when you study American slavery and you look at Frederick Douglass, you recognize him as a reconstructionist. All of the abolitionists tried to reconstruct what it meant to be racialized as a Black person in American society, because at that time, Black people were literally written outside of humanity. That's how it was chattel slavery. So if you were recognized as Black in American society, then you were enslaved. And if you were free, then you were a person of color. if you were indigenous or of African descent. And if you were European, then you were racialized as white. And so it goes. And then when you have the civil rights movement, again, there's this push to reconstruct what it is to be racialized as Black in American society. And then you get to the Black Lives Matter movement, and there's this push to reconstruct what it is to be Black in American society. So there's this paradox of constant and persistent reconstructive efforts as it pertains to race, and the simultaneous exclusion of anyone who comes in with the question of, why are we even trying to keep race, right? Like, why do I have to identify myself as Black, or why should I identify you as Black? Isn't that part of the problem? Oh, basically shut up and go somewhere else with that, because that's going against the narrative that, is mainstream. So we have to be able to get to a point now where more people become crystal clear on number one, knowing that there are alternative philosophies of race, because most people don't. And that's what makes it so easy to misunderstand and to misidentify as self-hate, right? If you're a racialized Black person in our society and you're over here talking about, I'm not Black, right? Or we have to do away with race, people automatically pin that as, oh, that's white supremacy, right? You're just trying to coddle white people. You're trying to be white. You hate yourself because you're Black. It's like, no, actually, that has nothing to do with it, but thank you. Let's have a conversation. Let's have a conversation about the fact that there's an alternative way to do this. And part of my evidence for why Reconstruction has taken us as far as it can is largely the fact that for over 4 centuries, that's all we've been doing with race. We've been trying to reconstruct racism, right? By trying to refashion what it is to be racialized as Black in our society. And then one last thing I wanted to say, Carlen, and I'll happily pass the mic, is the difference between skepticism and constructionism that I want to emphasize, because I recognize that a lot of people really struggle to really understand the difference. Constructionists, such as the CRT folks that you were just referencing, they'll say things like, race isn't real. It was created just to subjugate and oppress certain groups of people. But what they mean to say is race isn't biologically real, but it's real, right? But they're saying it in the language of it's not real. Whereas skeptics will say it's not real, full stop. There's no disclaimer about, but it's real in this way. No, it's not real. Racism is real, but race itself is not real. People socially constructed racism, and then part of the machinery of that became race, right, in the ways that we think of it now. But that doesn't make race any realer. It makes racism real, and race is still a fiction, a unicorn. And I don't know. I think the distinction matters, because skepticism, the more people can learn about skepticism, that opens the door to eliminativism, because then it's like you would be really confounded to still advocate for maintaining and reconstructing race if you really understand the genealogy of it, as Adrian was saying, and if you really understand what's happening with it. 9 times out of 10, you open the door to skepticism and automatically people become an eliminativist. And I think that's part of why those voices and perspectives and philosophies have been hidden for so long.
So I'll let Adrian and Ken go, but a short answer. I'm summing up Dr. Mason's answer. She basically made it very clear, though. She said that basically the first step, if we're going to really get to this thing called eliminating, is get people to skepticism, get people to understand that the unreality of race. So that's pretty clear. Good. Okay, Adrian.
Well, Carlen, one of the things that I try not to do is involve myself in echo chambers, because I like to critically think and be challenged, and not just believe what I've always believed, rather to examine my beliefs constantly and to test and to challenge those. That's difficult here today because all of you, we share such a similar worldview. Listening to Dr. Sheena, I was waiting for her to say, "Oh, you ain't Black, you hate yourself," because we've all known and heard this in our space and our work, that if you have dark brown skin in America and you suggest that the concept of race is not real, then people will often look at you and suggest that you must be self-loathing or a sympathizer for white supremacy, et cetera, et cetera. And I've heard this from LA to New York, from Michigan to Florida. So all across the country, I've heard these things. I'm sure each of you have as well. I think the step is just as Dr. Sheena put it, education is the first element of change to inform people of where they are in the entire framework. What are their beliefs? Asking them to examine what they individually believe. As it was mentioned beforehand, that this topic is somewhat removed from a lot of classrooms all across America. I was startled several years ago as I began to pick up books and read them, how there is no shortage of people over the past 100 years who have said what we're saying here today. Mm-hmm. This is not new. This is not a, we're not some engineers of ideas that have never been considered before. There have been people who have written volumes of literature on this topic, and the fact that it's still questioned in academia, scholars. I was talking to a medical professional just the other day, a surgeon, who had to pause and think about whether or not race was biological at all. And this is someone who's well studied. And then the question became, well, I asked, well, if black and white is somehow useful in medicine, what kind of prescription would you give to someone who you identify as black and how you identify someone as white? If those two people came together and had a child, would you then give their children half the prescription that you gave each of them, right? How is this used in your medical work? And people just never think about these things. So I think it's necessary to continue these conversations, but not just stop here, to have a structured framework to enter into the academic space, whether that's through lectures or through textbooks, and literally educate people on the reality that race does not exist. And furthermore, one of the things that I've been doing in my work is educating on the destructive effects of the concept itself and how it is keeping us rather regressive as a society. I didn't even realize until Dr. Sheena was talking, then I'll pass the mic as well. As I was listening to Dr. Sheena, I looked at my screen and I saw the people that were on the screen with me. And it was just then that I realized that everyone on the screen has somewhat of a darker shade of brown skin. Because I have retrained myself to not look at people based on their melanin concentration. It is a conscious effort to relearn how you see people. And so I didn't even, it was not the first thing that came to my mind is, oh, I'm in a forum full of my brothers and sisters. That's not what came to my mind based on the physical appearance. Mm-hmm. I do feel like I'm in a common place because the people in this forum share a common belief system and a common set of ideas that I do, but not, I've learned to unlearn the association of melanin levels. And that's something that needs to be done to erase race.
Ken, you have a word to say, or should I interrupt?
No, I'm just thinking about the things that were said. Oh, well, I say one thing: truth needs to be told. I mean, how do you eliminate anything? And looking at, to me, racism as a belief, or race, however you define it, like I mentioned before, I don't have a definition for race, and honestly, I'm not trying to have a conversation about race for the reason what I see it as being, and more so what it is not. So it's almost like the more I speak it, I'm maintaining it into being. We already know it's not there, but so how do you talk about something that we say is not a reality, or whatever we say it is? I have no definition for it. So the only thing I see that I can do is speak truth to other people's reality. If I'm involving other people, it almost has, I'll say it has little to do with what I think, what my philosophy is, or what I believe, if someone else doesn't believe it also. I'm not into convincing someone to change their beliefs. Or if I am, if that's my goal, if I think that someone is believing or following something that's wrong, the most effective I think I can be at it is being being right or being righteous, not based upon what I think, but if there's truth to what I'm saying, I need to speak that truth. And for me, like I said, I use those words from Stevie Wonder's song as I need to change my words into truth and change that truth into love. Those are my two tenets right there. What if is what I'm saying truth, and then changing that to love, not convincing someone. And there's something I remember Dr. Mason said, which I think people can sense a person's honesty and their authenticity, whether or not they fully understand where they're coming from or not. And I just thought that was impressive, and it touched me when she told me about people that she works with. You know, they get it, and it surprises her sometimes. And I think a lot of times people sense where you're coming from, you know, with whatever you're coming with, and they just sense your spirit, your honesty, and your authenticity. And so for me to change anything, I'm constantly working on myself as that agent of change. So the only thing I could say is truth needs to be told, and as that occurs, the lie that I think racism is, and you know, Carl, and I share with you, it's like the sin of racism is idolatry. It's the false image that is presented, the false image that it portrays, that's based upon hierarchy or spectrums of classes of people. And to me, getting to who we really are, not as labels, which involves getting rid of these labels that we believe ourselves to be, that will get us there. But truth has a lot to do with it, and that's something that is more so experienced and then demonstrated more than it could ever be spoken about.
Wow, man, that's so powerful what you just said right there, because that's really what has gotten me even to this place. So just realizing that truth. Dr. Mason, you mentioned the word racialized. When we talk about racialized Black people or racialized white people, do those refer to those we refer to know that they have been racialized? And the second part of that question is everyone in America racialized?
Yeah, I think before I forget, I just want to highlight something between what Adrian and Ken said, right? That there does need to be a framework, and that the framework has to be such that the capital T truth, it helps more people get closer to the truth. And that although ideas about racelessness and ideas about, I'll say eliminativism would be a more apt way to put it, are not new in American history or global history. I mean, I study Caribbean literature as well, and I would say it's very prevalent outside of the US. Those ideas and sort of efforts aren't new, but what is new is the theory of racistness, which is a framework. It's a framework with rules, with tools for helping teach about, talk about, and analyze and interpret race and racism in whatever sphere a person is doing that type of work. And I think that I wish I could skip to the good part that Ken was kind of describing of banning the word race and all of the race language, Black, white, all of that from my language. And I will say increasingly, as much as possible, it's also something I try to reflect in my book. I just wonder how many readers are going to pick up on it. At some point, race talk falls away. It falls away in my book because I'm trying to demonstrate the liberatory possibilities that come with doing things through my framework. And so it strikes me that in the meantime and between time, one potential solution to avoiding upholding the sort of natural belief in race is to insert language such as racialized, or so-called Black person or so-called white person, because at minimum, it's indicating that that it's not a natural category, that there's an action, there's something happening that to the person, that a person does to themselves and that society does to them. And that's been my sort of default language and strategy for not upholding the same thing when I have to talk in race language, right? Which I do primarily when I'm talking about racism. And I encourage more people, constructionist, skeptic, whatever, to adopt that kind of language and that kind of practice, because it is something that can help us at least stop unintentionally upholding the same category that many people say, oh, it's not real, right? But racism is real. So we can do that. And I would say that I think of racialization in terms of definition. I think of racialization as that process which happens in an attempt to group people for the purpose of subjugation or elevation, the sort of class or caste aspect that Adrian was talking about at the outset of this conversation. So racialization does that. In American society, we know the language associated with race, Black, white, Asian, Indigenous, etc. So everyone in American society is racialized. And I think there's a case to be made that everyone in the world is racialized, but because racialization, that is because the caste system or the class system that exists in other countries, for example, or even during other time periods, looks different from what it looks in American society, that racialization and the language that's associated with that action there, that practice, can be different. And that's how you get the Nazis versus the Jews, right? That's a racialization that happens. And by extension, it's racism, but it's not the black and white way that Americans tend to think racism operates. So, and I think knowing that truly, and like relativizing one's understanding of what racialization is, how it looks in other places, does capital R race travel, does racism travel, which philosophers of race actually explore. I think knowing those kinds of that kind of information can just help Americans get their hands around the problem in American society. And so I think it has its benefits, because right now the sort of CRT framework, or I would argue the framework that we've been using for centuries, even before CRT proper became named, that framework just encourages this idea that white supremacy is everywhere, it's global, it's omnipresent, you can't escape it, you can't escape racism. And maybe there's something to be said about, racism is everywhere, but it's not the racism that Americans are used to thinking about. And I think it matters, because then if it's not necessarily everywhere in the same way, that means we can do something about it, right? That means we can actually get to the other side of that thing here. Yeah, hopefully that was enough to chew on.
That was a lot to chew on. My goodness.
That was some good meat.
I'm looking at the clock and going, oh man, we got 8 minutes. It's like, this is the fastest hour ever.
No.
Harlan, now's the time to pass around the collection plate after Sheena just speaking, pass around the plate.
Yes.
Well, I mean, and there's so much I wanted to, from when Adrian spoke, then Ken spoke, then she, and I've just been quiet because, normally I'm like hogging the room, but I had so many comments on all of that. So, but so let me get this one comment before you ask a final question, because our time's almost up. But, you said so many good things there, Dr. Mason. I really like the viewpoint. And I'm just thinking, how this idea, race basically reifies itself. It really does. It creates this thing where it keeps pumping itself up so that it stays relevant, so it stays in the minds of everyone who uses it. And so you all were talking about, because I didn't make a comment on what is the first thing we need to do, but I heard how what all of you all said basically came down to the same thing, because we were talking about, we've got to really get people to move their minds from the idea that this is something real to that it is not real. And so basically we make them skeptics, and then they're able to see that we do need to get rid of this thing, because as you were saying, Dr. Mason, most skeptics become eliminativists because they understand that this is something. And so, and when you think about that, then that would impact the way, and I, as a school teacher, I used to say that we did a very poor job in public education of how we teach history. And I think Adrian was making this point. We do a very poor job of how we teach that, because we don't teach our kids to question this stuff. We just teach them the stuff. And it's usually assigned based on the thought of racialized teachers either way, given their views. And so they haven't had to think about it. So that's why I'm thankful for you all, because these might be my last words, because I'm gonna give you all time to close out. But so I want to thank you all, because that's what I wanted to happen, was for that you all to create something that can get into the minds of people to at least begin thinking about it. Yeah, they're not going to be as deep as Dr. Mason. They're not going to know the 6 philosophies of race, and they're not going to have all that. But they can begin thinking about some of the basic things that you all have all said here today, and anything that you're going to say in closing. So, Wayne, give them a final question so we can close it all out.
Okay, so before I do that, did you want to play that video or no?
No, we don't have time. We don't. Yeah, I mean, we're talking about stuff. We're busy, you know. So yeah, because I was like, I wanted to. I told Dr. Hoyt I would try to get him in, but we just got so much meat, you know.
Hey, look, we got a powerhouse right here. So
yeah.
basically, my last question is just to give us an idea of some of the things you guys are working on right now, you know, as we speak, and how you're feeling about it. You feeling optimistic about it, or some pessimism about it? Do you think this is something that the country can go in that direction? So just kind of give us a little idea about what you guys are doing right now.
So we'll go Dr. Mason, then we'll go Adrian, then we'll go Ken. And these might be your last words. So give us all you got here. But yeah.
Oh man, a better question is, what am I not working on? Probably be a shorter answer. But let me highlight a couple things. So my first book, a textbook. So this is definitely a scholarly text. It gets released in July. So this summer, it's called The Theory of Racelessness, A Case for Anti-Racism. And in conjunction with that happening, I have an event in San Francisco called Heterodox Healing that I'm doing. People can really connect with all of the things I'm doing if you find me on Twitter, Sheena Mason, PhD.
Will you still be there after Elon Musk? You'll still there?
I'm still going to be on Twitter, yes. Okay. And also, I would be remiss to not mention the conference that Dr. Carlos Hoyt, Greg Thomas, and I are organizing. It's going to be in Boston in September. I think the date is September 23rd, potentially 24th. It's a Saturday. I know that for a fact. And it's going to be a conference on racelessness. So I hope to see all of y'all there at minimum. And I definitely hope to see some people who catch this Facebook Live, because we have a lot of work to do, but as has been said, I think we just need to be about that life of opening the door to as many people as possible to properly understand eliminativism. And that's it. And then they can make up their own minds where they go from there. So those are just a few of the things I'm working on in an effort to do exactly that.
Oh, and Dr. Mason, your final question is, you know, how are you feeling about where we're going as a country? Optimistic, pessimistic? How do you feel about where we're headed in this direction?
So
based on your work, your work, are you optimistic, pessimistic about the work that you're doing and how America will respond?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. Well, you gentlemen probably know this about me, but I'm kind of the ever optimist. It's kind of interesting because I've experienced a lot of hardship and traumas in my life, and yet I'm always the one laughing for seemingly no reason and that sort of thing. And some way, somehow, I bring that joy and lightness to my fight against racism, which might be refreshing for some people because it's not all doom and gloom. And I think that helps people receive me and receive the information in ways that have become increasingly and overwhelmingly positive. I think Ken was kind of alluding to this earlier. It's like people see something in me that I don't necessarily see in myself. Imposter syndrome is real for any of my fellow imposters out there. People who would otherwise turn the other way, right, toward anything, if they hear the word racistness, they kind of run in the other direction. That's not what's happening with me. So I'm embracing it. I am also able to dust off the vitriol that does come in my direction by people who don't know any better, who think they can phase me, but they can't. And you know, I'm going to keep that sort of open mind as it pertains to how I engage with people and how I share information. And I think that helps the reception be more overwhelmingly positive than anything else. But make no mistake, it's not easy work. You know, people email me, call me the N-word, you name it. That happens, but we're not talking about them. that's a small minority of people, thankfully.
Great. Great. Outstanding. Thanks, Dr. Mason. All right, Adrian.
I'm just gonna get on a plane and go wherever Dr. Sheena's headed. And that seems to be like just the thing to do. It will, I'll just show up and pass out flyers. No, my work through the pull movement, we're centered in North Georgia. And one of the things that we do is our race scholarship. And it's something that I'm proud of and excited to see. What we're trying to do is develop ambassadors through the post-secondary system. So what we've done is we've began awarding scholarships to individuals who can articulate the idea of race in a way that expresses that they understand that it has no definable parameters. And taking those individuals and deepening their understanding of this concept of race and the societal ills that come from it, and hopeful that they will be the change agents of society through their newfound understanding. And of course, I think that the reception to our work at the Pull Movement has been extraordinarily positive. We have several supporters. I think one of the things that Dr. Mason said about the minority, the statistical minority of people who are negative and vitriolic is so small that I really don't have time to spend on those mindsets. Not to dismiss someone's idea or perspective. It's just that if someone is inquisitive, I'm open to answering questions and educating and informing people. But if someone is just vile and intentionally hateful, the world's too big and my time's too short. So that's
outstanding, outstanding. And Ken. Oh, you're muted. My bad. I think I muted you. Yeah, I did that. Okay, go ahead.
To end with what I started with, I'm thankful to be in the company of professionals in the conversation, people who have books, frameworks, like Dr. Mason said, for dealing with this issue. I'm working on me. To answer that last question, I'm working on me. That's the biggest contribution I can give, operating from the kingdom that's within me. And I'm more than optimistic. As far as the country going in the direction that I desire, wow, I'm kind of not thinking on that level, because as far as I'm concerned, America is a construct in itself. We're talking about race. America is a construct. And I'd say that I wrote this down. It's based on founding principles and ideologies. It's a collection of ideas, ideologies, and social constructs to come up with this thing that we call America, if any of you have a definition for that. And America is evolving, if I must speak to the country, and evolution is very slow process. And some people say, you get the people say, oh, America was based on racism, slavery was America's original sin, and all that stuff. And arguments can be made for that, and you hear them all the time. For me, I told you what racism represents on a personal level, and America doesn't have a patent on any of those things people accuse it of being. And I'm optimistic that people are going to begin to see and be transformed by the renewing of their minds, brought about through conversations that you are having, and that people like Dr. Mason, Adrian, and that you folks are doing. I'm more than optimistic.
This was phenomenal, guys. I mean, this was amazing. And like I said, you all had so much depth that this could have gone on for another hour. You could have gone so much deeper, but you kept it at the level that I wanted, and I think everyone's going to benefit. So this will be not only, of course, it was live on Facebook, but I will edit it and take out some of the pieces that we didn't need in there in the beginning. None of the things that you all said, for sure, but we'll post this to YouTube so that you all can promulgate this throughout your platforms and everything else. So I want to thank you all. If I had $1 million, you'd all get $1 million from me right now, but I don't have that yet. I'm working with Elon Musk to see what we can do about that. But I want to thank you all. This was great. All right, Wayne,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Wayne, you got anything to say? Closing comments? You're
Yeah,
muted.
this was a great discussion. I can't wait to see some of the feedback that we'll get when people get a chance to watch this. So I appreciate everybody coming on today.
So I want to really thank you all. You guys were outstanding, and I appreciate you guys and everything that you were able to give to us today. It was awesome. All right. Thanks for being here on this National Week of Conversation and Erase Race, talking about race.
Yes.
Go with our closing mute. Get Dr. Hoyt out of the way.